Story time about how I found out my husband was cheating on me with his stepsister and her best friend. My husband and I had been married for 5 years. We were living in another state when he was fired from work and my job wasn't paying well enough. We decided to move in with his family until we could figure things out and get back on our feet. He had his stepsister and she was drop dead gorgeous. Since he didn't have a job, he would spend most of his time at home while I dropped off our son at daycare and then went to work. When I would get home, he'd go to the bar. At first, I thought things were normal and he was just stressed out about not being able to find work. However, I started getting suspicious once he started being a little aggressive towards me. He stopped wanting to talk to me as often and barely slept next to me anymore. His parents planned a trip to Europe and asked us to take care of the house while they were gone, to which we agreed. I noticed whenever I wasn't home, he would be home alone with his stepsister, and whenever I got back, they would both leave. I also noticed he wasn't trying very hard to find a job, leaving all the responsibilities to me. One day I was calling him while I was at work and he wasn't picking up. I had a bad feeling and asked my boss if I could leave early. Thankfully, my boss was nice and let me go. When I got home, I heard 2 girls giggling and the sound of a guy huffing coming from our room upstairs. What I saw next left me devastated. Part 2 of how I found out my husband was cheating on me with his stepsister and her best friend. When I came home and heard the sounds coming from our room upstairs, my blood was rushing through my body. I quietly went up the stairs and found my husband screwing his stepsister and her best friend at the same time. I was so devastated and heartbroken. I didn't know what to do, so I quickly rushed out of the house and went back to work. When I didn't return home that night, my husband called me asking why I was late and started accusing me of cheating. That's when I realized that none of them had seen me earlier and decided to get back at him. Earlier that day when I returned to work, my boss asked me if I was okay because he noticed my eyes were red from crying. I broke down, and you know how the saying goes, a shoulder to cry on becomes a D to ride on. When I told him what I saw, he told me to file for divorce and make him pay for the nasty deed. He also told me that he'd be by my side and would take care of everything, including a place for me and my son to stay. I went home that night like nothing was wrong and acted like things were okay. The next day came and I went home early again to catch him in the act. This time I recorded footage of him cheating for evidence. In the end, I got a divorce, money, and full custody of my son. Now I'm married to my boss, living in a big house with someone who deeply loves and respects me. This is why you never truly know someone. When I was 10 years old, I met my best friend. We were pretty much inseparable. All throughout school, we were always by each other's side. Our last names both started with J, so we had almost every class together. He was a smart kid and a model student. However, his home life wasn't the best. He also had ADHD and was bipolar. My family was like a second family to him. As we grew into adults, our views differed on what we wanted to do with our lives. He had his first child when he was 18 and split up with the child's mom, so the thought of college never sat well with him. He worked a 9-to-5 job instead to support himself. By 21, he met another woman and had a child with her. This time he was doing good. He stayed with her and was taking care of both of his children. I was really proud of him for stepping up and getting his life together. Suddenly, something inside him flipped like a switch. He randomly up and left that woman and moved to another state. I hadn't spoken to him for 2 months after he did this. One late night, I was woken up by a phone call from his mother saying that he was in jail. I asked what for and she told me that he raped a 15-year-old girl. He was caught and sent to jail. He was serving 2 years behind bars only because there were texts from that girl saying that she was 18 years old. 2.5 years went by when he finally got out. I told him he could stay with me until he was back on his feet, but he refused. Then things took a dark turn. Part 2 of why you truly never know someone. He decided to stay with my mom for a month instead. Every day I would message and check up on him. I would always get the same vague answer saying that he's good and thanking us for helping him out. One day, my mom called me in a panic state. She told me that he was in his room with a knife and threatening to unalive himself. I immediately drove over and talked him down, taking the knife away from him. Later that night, I called to check up on him because I was worried. He didn't answer. I called my mom to check on him and she said that he was in his room. I asked her to go check, and when she did, he was nowhere to be found. Later, we found out where he had gone that night. Apparently, he walked over to his ex-girlfriend's house to spy on her and her boyfriend. I'm not sure what shifted in him, but he walked behind the house and ripped off a piece of his shirt. He stuffed the ripped shirt in a crack of the window and set the fabric on fire. Then he just walked away. He attempted to kill his child, ex-girlfriend, and an unknown man. Luckily, no one was harmed because the adults in the house were still awake and smelled the fire. They quickly got the children to safety and called the fire department. My best friend admitted to this and has since been in jail. After this, I stopped all contact.
Am I wrong for wanting to have my wedding even though my sister lost her baby? A week before my wedding, my sister found out she miscarried at 5 months. Obviously, I was very upset for her as losing a baby can be very tough, especially because it was her first baby. But I didn't want it to end up being more important than my wedding. 3 days before my wedding, my sister announces at a family gathering that she wants my wedding to be canceled and changed to a funeral for her baby. I was so upset that she would even ask this. I had been waiting months for my wedding and her miscarriage happened so soon. She burst into tears in front of our family, saying I could wait a few months for my wedding, but she couldn't delay her baby's funeral. I got so mad I stormed off. My whole family took her side, telling me to cancel my wedding, even though I had arranged and bought everything. Even my dress and venue was ready, so I couldn't just cancel. I ended up cutting off all of my family and only a few remained to attend my wedding. My sister hasn't spoken to me in years and neither has my family. In my opinion, if my sister loses a baby like a week before my wedding, I wouldn't have it.
I obtained custody of my sister's 3 kids back in 2018 after she left them alone for 2 weeks to go on a drug bender. It was a huge transition for the kiddos because not only did they have to switch schools and daycares, but they also wouldn't be able to see their mother anymore. I've adopted the kids and have full custody of them. They're doing better now and leading happier lives. Recently though, my sister was released from prison and wants to see them. She called me begging to have a visit with them and telling me that I could give them back now because she was out of prison. I've had a talk with the 9-year-old and he says he doesn't want to see his mom yet. He told me that he still hates her for leaving him alone. The girls have no memories of her. The smallest was only 3 months old the last time she saw her. I feel like I could have helped them foster a better relationship with their mom, but I don't want to force them to meet her if they don't want to. My close family has told me that the oldest doesn't know what he's talking about, and it's my fault the little ones don't remember their mother because I didn't take them to see her when she was in prison. They also told me that it's my responsibility to force them to meet her even when they don't want to because it's what's best for them and they shouldn't grow up without their mother. I've spoken to a professional about this and they said it should be up to the kids. Am I being a jerk to my sister by not letting her kids see her if they don't want to? Part 2 of not letting my sister see her kids. I gave my oldest 2 weeks to really think about whether he wanted to see my sister or not. I figured that his original decision might have been made out of anger, so I wanted to give him time to make such an important decision. Ultimately, he decided that he did actually want to talk to her. I was a bit surprised, but we set up a Zoom call between them with me supervising. Right before the call, he admitted to me that he wanted to talk to her just to see if she'd say sorry. She didn't. Instead, she opened the call with, "Hello, it's been so long. I guess you're ready to come home with me now?" That's when she noticed I was sitting there with him. She immediately launched into accusations of alienation, followed by saying if I don't give the kids back, then she'd call the police and say I kidnapped them. My oldest was disgusted and asked her if she was going to apologize to him. She had the audacity to ask what for. At that point, he shut off the Zoom call. I asked him if he was okay, but he spent the rest of the afternoon in his room by himself. That night, he told me that he never wanted to talk to her again. I told him he didn't have to talk to her again if he didn't want to, and we'd never give him back over to her. Before now, I honestly never considered myself as their parent, even after legally adopting them. Now I realize those kids are my kids and they're going to be for the rest of my life. Storytime about how a stranger wandered into my house and it led to something amazing. I woke up one night to someone ringing my doorbell over and over vigorously. I looked at the clock and I saw it was 3 in the morning. I went to the door and looked out of the peephole and saw a young woman outside on my porch. I opened the door and could immediately tell that she was intoxicated. She started explaining to me that she was at a bar down the street and lost her phone. That's when she asked if she could use mine and call someone for a ride home. It was freezing outside, so I reluctantly let her in. She asked me for water, so I led her to the kitchen. She proceeded to open my fridge and start eating my lunch meat and various other snacks. She then kicked off her heels and sat down at the table with a jar of pickles and started talking to me like she's known me for years. She told me her name was Krista and asked me how work was and what I was up to tomorrow. I reminded her that she needs to call someone to come pick her up and handed her my cell phone. She took the phone and FaceTimed her brother. She told him that she needs a ride but she has no idea where she's at and handed me the phone to talk to him. I told him the situation and gave him my address to come pick her up ASAP. A few seconds later, my doorbell began ringing again and someone started banging on my door. I went to the door and opened it to find a guy outside and he looked furious. This is when things got intense. Part 2 of how a stranger wandered into my house and it led to something amazing. I opened the door and quickly found out that this guy was Chris's boyfriend and it became clear that they were in some sort of fight. Chris started telling him to leave and accused him of following her and kept screaming at him that it's over between them. The guy turned his attention to me and asked what guy Krista was here to sleep with and began accusing her of coming here to cheat. He started yelling at me for helping her. All of a sudden, he grabbed Krista by her hair and started dragging her out of the house. I quickly ran after them and started screaming at the top of my lungs for him to let her go. Luckily, one of my neighbors heard the commotion and came to our aid. The guy let Chris go, but now he was trying to fist fight my neighbor. A few seconds later, a truck pulled up to my house and a man jumped out, which turned out to be Chris's brother. I quickly explained the situation and helped Krista into his truck. Chris's brother proceeded to confront her boyfriend, who was still making a scene, knocked him out clean with one hit, and drove off, leaving her boyfriend knocked out cold on my front lawn. Her brother texted me the next day thanking me and apologizing for knocking that guy out in my yard. We started texting back and forth and getting along, and I actually asked him out a couple days later. We've been dating for a few months now thanks to his drunk sister stumbling onto my porch. I guess everything happens for a reason.
Storytime about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So a little background information. I was in my sophomore year of high school, and my boyfriend and I had been dating for about 6 months. And he had been best friends with this girl, we're gonna call her Addie, for about 3 years. Now, I had known Addie way before that, probably since we were in kindergarten. But her and I weren't like BFFs, we were more of acquaintances. But obviously, we became friends because she was always around my boyfriend. A month after him and I started dating, I decided that we had to set boundaries for their friendship. Because they had first period together, right? Well, every morning at 9:45, I would go on Snapchat and I would see a picture of them. And it would be her kissing him on the cheek. Not only would it be on her story, but it would also be on his. And I had her on Snapchat before that. She had never done that, ever. So he said that he had talked to Addie about it, right? And things were good for the next 2 months. Then they were forced to work together on a project. Like for part 2. Part 2 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with his girl best friend. So like I said, they had been forced to work together on a school project. At least that's what he told me. So I brushed it off because I was not about to seem like the jealous girlfriend. Well, the next day, him and I were supposed to go out to the movies. So I texted him right before we were about to leave, and I said, "Hey, are you on your way to get me?" He goes, "OMG, no, I'm sorry, I forgot. I have to work with Addie on this project. She's about to come over my house." So at this point, I'm like really pissed off. So I text him and I say, "I thought you guys had a whole week to work on this project. Why does it have to be tonight?" Addie knew that him and I were supposed to go to the movies that night also. He said, "We just want to get it done really quickly so that way I can spend the rest of the week with you." And she's snapping me the whole time that she's at his house off of his phone. So at around 1:30 a.m., I get a Snapchat from her on his account, and she's laying on his chest. Like for part 3. Part 3 about why I made my boyfriend stop being friends with this girl best friend. So like I said, she snaps me at 1:30 in the morning a picture of her laying on his chest, and it's captioned, "Hey girlie, I hope you don't mind, but I have to spend the night at his house. He lost track of time working on our project and it's way too late for him to take me home." So at this point, I'm furious and I don't snap her back. So the next morning, I call my boyfriend and I asked him, "Hey, is Addie still there?" So he says yeah, and then I ask him to put me on speakerphone. So when he does, I say hi to Addie. She goes, "OMG, hey girl, how are you?" And that's when I pretty much go off on this bitch. I tell him that while he was asleep, she was sending me pictures of her laying on top of him off of his Snapchat, and that she was sending those type of pictures to multiple people on his Snapchat because my best friend had texted me that morning saying that she thought that we broke up because Addie was sending her pictures of her laying on top of him. So I tell him, "Pick, me or her." And she starts crying. After a minute of silence, he hangs up the phone and then blocks me. Good luck to the next girl.
Worst way to get cheated on Storytime ever. This is not my story. The story is from a follower. Everybody always noticed all these red flags in my boyfriend Carl, but of course I did not see it. Everybody always felt like he was faking his affection towards me, and for some reason I just did not see that. I'm like, I love him and y'all can go get a life. Then it went from him faking his affection to us not being affectionate at all. Like we went months without any physical intimacy. So I went to go talk to my dad about it to get a male's perspective, and he was completely on Carl's side. Like, maybe he's just busy at work, blah, blah, blah. Every excuse in the world. So I was like, "Well, Dad, do you think you can talk to him and see where his head's at?" He agreed really fast. He said, "I'll invite him over later to talk, but you can't be here because I don't want your presence to throw him off." I was like, "Okay." So they're talking for about an hour, but about an hour into it, I realized that me and Carl had a movie date planned. So I used my spare key and went back into the house. They weren't in the living room. So I went upstairs and saw the work.